Hello there everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Joesephyr, and some of you may not be aware of this, but Joesephyr of Square Enix isn't the only one with an affinity for the character I'm about to talk about today. Welcome to today's Should You Pull video for Dissidia Final Fantasy Opera Omnia, and today, obviously, we're going to be talking about Kefka and his LD and burst weapon that are going to be turning up very, very soon, far sooner than I thought it was going to, in fairness, and we're going to be discussing the Heretic event that's going to be coming along with him. So in order for you guys to have a look at what kind of things we can expect from Kefka, whether you should pull, whether there are others that would pull for Kefka, then of course stay tuned and keep on watching. As always, don't forget to check out all of the social media links in the description box below. On Twitch this week, obviously I'm going to be covering Kefka's event as it comes out on Tuesday or Monday, depending on where you are in the world. And tonight, in fact, I'm going to be streaming some Final Fantasy IX, so by all means come along and join in with that. I'm hoping that we're going to do some cosplay stuff in the near future as well. I've been picking up bits for Final Fantasy XVI's protagonist as well as Warrior of Light, and that's a big one to be going with, so that's a journey I'm going to take you guys on eventually as well. With Patreon, I shout out one of my patrons every time I release a video so I can give my thanks to every single one of you that wants to support the channel further, and today that person is going to be Joesephyr. So thank you very much for your support, and obviously if you'd like to get involved with the Would You Pull part of this video as well as any other videos that I'll be making, then definitely have a look in that link in the description box. Don't forget to check out all the websites that you can see around me for Opera Omnia, and of course don't forget to check out all the content creators out there besides myself. So we're going to start off here by talking about Kefka himself. Now, no other characters gain anything new from this, although we're going to be seeing Lise, Aerith, Shadow, Freya, and Seymour turning up on these Heretic banners alongside Kefka. None of them have anything new, but there might be some nice toys there that you may want to pick up, like Freya if you didn't go for her the first time, or Aerith. But Kefka himself doesn't actually get a rework, he just gets an LD and a burst. Now, honestly, Kefka didn't really need one, because he got his EX Plus rather late, and he got a rework along with that improved all of his hit counts, it gave him access to Meteor Plus, and it gave him a really strong, damaging EX on top of it as well by being a, what is essentially 12 hit Brave HP attack, and then Meteor Plus made it so his longevity was much higher, he got splash damage with his HP Plus essentially, and it just made him a much more well-rounded character. If you've not used Kefka before, then Kefka is all about the debuffs. He inflicts 6 different debuffs all by himself through his EX, his skill 1 and his skill 2. So we're talking attack down, speed down, defense down, a framed debuff that does all 3 of the above again, as well as a poison effect, and then he also inflicts HP silence and blind with his Trine attack. So he's got 6 debuffs that are all going to be really nasty for your opponent to deal with. However, he doesn't play especially well with other debuffers because he takes up all that space by himself. Now his LD makes this even worse in some ways, but obviously improves him quite exponentially. So what Hyperdrive does is it's another 12 hit Brave HP attack that does splash damage that extends all the debuffs that he's got, which includes that lovely HP silence and blind that he gets, and it also makes all of the debuffs that he inflicts framed. Now this is very much a double-edged sword, but the benefits far outweigh the detriments. But in terms of detriment, it makes it even harder to pair him up with anyone else that does any kind of debuffs. But realistically, you weren't taking Kefka along with anyone that was going to debuff anyway, because you don't really want to be overwriting all the debuffs that he does have. By enframing all of those debuffs, what that does mean is it makes it really hard for your opponent to get rid of them. So, all of the enemies in the Heretic missions, as we'll get to in a little while, like to buff themselves with all manner of different kinds of buffs, but most of them are not framed themselves. If you've got 6 framed debuffs, you can't buff yourself, except for very select framed debuffs. You cannot buff yourself at all because there's no space for it. So basically, not only does Kefka inflict all of these really nasty debuffs all at once, he also makes it so they can't get rid of them and they can't buff over them, and it's kind of like a preemptive dispel, because if they can't buff, then there's a lot of things that they can't do. So having him in combination with characters that are really strong in terms of just buffs or just damage, it actually works out very well for him. Aphmau has always been a particular favourite of mine, because while she does have a little bit of debuffing in her kit, she doesn't rely on them in any way, and being able to pair her up with him and just have the debuff evasion, the auras, all of that nice stuff, the longevity that can now go along with Kefka. Kefka sounds like somebody that's very difficult to slot into a party, and in some ways he is, but he's extremely rewarding when he does. Now, The Power Stone buffs that you get from Hyperdrive are that you get more attack, you do more damage, and you get a 4th use out of it. 4 uses of any LD is always going to be a plus in my book. But we're also going to get a burst weapon that comes along with him. Now, his burst weapon is nice, for want of a better term. It's certainly not quite as, oh my god, I must have it, as Noctis or Arden, but it's an AoE HP attack. So we've had single target ones, we have HP, like AoE HP ones. This is an AoE one that does 100% AoE damage, and it also has a burst effect of increases HP damage dealt to enemies based on the number of debuffs that they have. Now, given that you're Kefka, you're going to have 6 debuffs on them, unless they resist some of them, at which point you're not really bringing Kefka anyway. And the HP damage increase is increased by 5% for every debuff they have. So you're getting 30% extra HP damage on those enemies for 4 turns. In all honesty, the only issue I really have with this burst is that it doesn't last very long. And if you're taking Kefka's burst along, that means that you're not taking a different one. And honestly, this is not going to be a Noctis or an Arden in terms of burst power. It's good, it's very good. And having Kefka be able to do quite so much with his debuffs is going to be really good for him. And characters like Arden will work very well with him as well. So you just have to be careful who you take along with it. Because if you've got those 6 framed debuffs, somebody like Noctis can't put point blank warp strike on. You know, there's a lot of characters that rely on debuffs just to trigger other things that they do, and they obviously don't play very well with Kefka. So just be very cautious who you take along with Kefka, but when you do put him in the right party composition, he actually works out very, very well. Given how hard Kefka can hit with just the buffs that he's had with his rework recently, his EX+, his LD and his burst now, he is actually capable of dealing a pretty hefty amount of damage alongside all of these debuffs. So in terms of artifacts, you're just going to want more damage out of him. So attack 108 and his C50, which is actually very strong as well, by raising his max bravery and his attack, which are 2 stats you definitely want more of when you're going in with a damage dealer, then you're going to want copies of those too. Now that we can move on to the event of what comes along with Kefka, which is going to be Heretic missions, which we've had numerous times by now, so it's all about taking lots of different teams with you, unless you have synergy characters, at which point you can just go through everything. But bear in mind that we're on the tail end of Chaos, as I've said previously with Edward's event, so we're going to kind of have an easier time of things for the next couple of weeks before we start hitting Lufenia difficulty. Now, if you haven't seen my previous video on Lufenia difficulty, what it is, or anything like that, then be sure to go and check that out as well. But this event is going to, or at least the chaos for this event, is going to have 3 waves. The first of which is going to be the Necro Raven, which you may remember from Locke's event from previously. And then we have King Behemoths, which have popped up loads of times. And then we're also going to get Sahagin Shamans again. Now, these are enemies that people really don't like very much, and we are going to be seeing them again. We've had them in Abyss Beta, I think. We've had them in various different other places. But basically, the theme among these enemies is that they like to buff themselves, because there's no Dispel characters within like the synergy of the event, but Kefka's design now is to block out buffs and just replace them with debuffs that they can't get rid of. So the theme here is that they like to buff themselves, they like to do a lot of HP damage, so you've got various healers in the synergy like Aerith, like Freya, people like that, so you're going to be able to just try to stay alive while stopping your enemy from going out of control with buffs. So the couple of notes that I will make here is that the Necro Raven, so the first wave, will resurrect itself after the first time it loses all of its health. And when it does this, it cleanses itself of all debuffs. I mean every single one, framed or not. So if you have Kefka or you're taking other debuffers along with you, then be sure to make sure that you can reapply those debuffs as soon as the Necraven does that, or possibly just save some of your skills until after it's done that, so that you can just make sure that they're going to be able to be debuffed for as long as possible. The King Behemoths, they do their charge up attack, which gives them all of their buffs, so as long as you apply the debuffs beforehand, or you have a Dispel character, or you have various different means of getting around those buffs, or tanking damage as well, like because the enemies do a lot of AoE HP damage, Barsh is absolutely fantastic for this, and then just bring a big damage dealer. This particular event, there's no real gimmicks to the fight in any way, apart from the fact that they just like to buff themselves, and some of the enemies, particularly the Sahagin Shamans, like to debuff you a lot, so they'll inflict buffs or like debuffs on you while buffing themselves. So make sure that you're bringing buffs or some way of it, or you could even bring debuff evasion if you wanted to. Afmal could work here if you wanted it to. But the example team I have here for the Chaos is Arciela, Arden, and Barsh, because you want a straight up damage dealer. There's multiple enemies in both wave 2 and 3, so Arden's going to work absolutely fantastically here, so you're not going to have wasted your pulls on him. Barsh is going to be able to soak up any AoE damage that he can take and basically make it so your team is practically invincible. Then Arciela has Dispel in her kit and is going to make it so that it's that much easier to deal with everything that comes your way in terms of their buffing themselves. In terms of the Chaos Challenge, then honestly, you're going to want to bring Kefka. You can live without him if you've got... Because a lot of... The trouble with the Chaos Challenge here is that a lot of the characters on this banner are either not particularly strong or they're not really designed for damage. So realistically, this event wants you to bring Kefka along, even if you only have his EX. And bear in mind, there are 2 free pulls on this particular event because you have the banner that has Kefka's entire kit, including his EX, and you also have the second banner that has other characters along with it. So you're going to get 2 chances to get at least something for Kefka. But the Chaos Challenge here definitely wants you to bring him along to block out those buffs or replace them with debuffs instead. Aerith is a really good partner for Kefka, as is Freya, because they don't really inflict debuffs themselves. They're all about just staying alive, self-buffing. You get more Brave Overflow using Aerith. I actually am looking forward to maxing out my Aerith at last, mainly because I want her sphere for Kuja later down the line, but it means I have a use for my Aerith. And then if I got Freya, I'd be really happy to use her. But honestly, with Aerith and Kefka, you could take along literally anybody and it work out absolutely fine. Summons-wise, your typical summons, I like to bring Leviathan along with anyone that already reduces speed. So having Kefka and then a speed down on top of it is just going to make it that much more manageable. So I really like stacking debuffs, like I said during Edward's video. However, I'm going to find ways to do that with Kefka, even if I can't actually stack them with other characters. So now we come to the portion of the video that asks the big question. Should you be pulling on Kefka's Heretic banners, either or? Most people here will probably skip this banner, I imagine. But I personally am a huge fan of Kefka, so as you've seen with the photo at the beginning of the video, the fact that I talked about Kefka loads in my videos in the past, I really love him, and I've already come up with ways to use him. So honestly, I would like to try and ticket his LD. I'm not so fussed about the burst because he's not a primary damage dealer. He is more of a debuffer support that happens to deal a large amount of damage. So normally I would rather bring a primary damage dealing role burst like Noctis or Arden along with somebody like Kefka so that I can benefit from the burst effect better. Even though his burst effect is actually quite nice, it's also very short-lived. However, I really do like the in-framed debuffs part of his LD, which is why I would quite like to get it. Because I think the ability to just block off buffs altogether I find very interesting, and I like pairing him up with characters that aren't debuffs but do debuffs in their own way. Characters like Garland. If I had Garland LD, which I don't, depressingly, then they are a magnificent pairing because Garland lowers their speed without actually inflicting any debuffs to them, and this in combination with Kefka's speed downs from his EX and his skill 1, it all adds up and it makes for some really interesting team composition. So I find it a very, very fun challenge to circumvent the fact that I can't bring other debuffers along with Kefka. So if you're a big fan of him like I am, you've likely already found other characters that you want to use them with. I've already mentioned Garland, I've already mentioned Aphmau, I mentioned Aerith in the Chaos Challenge, she's really good with him. There's loads of characters that actually do work really well with Kefka, so don't see those 6 debuffs as something that go, well, I can't put him in anything. There are characters that don't work very well with him, because you'd be surprised how many characters do actually rely on debuffs, like I'd said, Noctis with his point blank warp strike, for example, but there are others that do. However, in the no camp of the should you pull part of it, which is admittedly probably bigger, if you want breathing room after Noctis, Barsh, Nine, Arden, and then Edward straight after, now is probably a good time for you to be doing it, because especially given that we've had all of these tickets and everything come from Autumn Festival, from most recent Chaos. I mean, I've been able to build tickets back up again, which has been fantastic. You know, you're going to be able to save from this portion on for the next Gauntlet of Banners. People are probably going to be pulling for Warrior of Light's LD. People are probably going to be pulling for Kurasame, Kuja, Lightning, Cloud. There's loads of characters coming up around November, December that a lot of people are very excited for. So now is probably as good a time as any for you to start building those resources back up. His bannermates are not great. I'm just going to put that out now. I would personally quite like to grab Freya because I didn't pull for her the first time, and I didn't recommend that other people pull for her the first time because she came out around the time that Arciella was available and Aphmau, and those were characters that were more pressing than Freya was. But she's a nice character to have. She does have her unique niche in the party-wide last stand from her EX, and she does work quite well. But I don't think that she's enough to make me want to go all in on gems with this banner. I certainly wouldn't go in with gems here. Even if you do really like Kefka, I'm only going to go in with tickets and try and get his LD that way. If you've got other debuffers that you're really happy with, that you find easier to use in different party compositions, Arciella, Edward, characters that have turn denial in their kit like HP Silence or Sleep or anything like that, you don't really need Kefka. He's a magic damage dealer with a burst, which is quite nice, but there are others coming. So honestly, as much as I love Kefka and I really want his stuff, I can't in good conscience say, yes, you should go all in on this banner, because I don't think you should. So now it's time for Would You Pull, the section of the video where I ask my patrons, you guys specifically, if you would pull on a banner at any given time, so that I can expand people's scope beyond just my own opinion and give you guys some opinions from other people, so that hopefully that will expand your own scope on whether you'd want to pull on a banner or not. Now, Kefka's banner, and it's a strange one, like Kefka's banner is kind of split down the middle. Now, 57% of the people I asked, which there is around 60 people, for those of you who want to know how many people I've asked, have said yes, they were going to go with tickets. 25% of people said no, they weren't going to pull on Kefka at all, and 18% of people said yes, they were going to go in with gems. So honestly, it's kind of all over the place. I am of the camp that wants to pull with tickets, because I would very much like to get his LD, and Freya would be a nice consolation prize for me. But I'm going to say, looking at people who are saying no, Zeltic here says, I'm hurting in my gems and tickets. I would try and pull the banner with LD with tickets, but I don't have my hopes up and I really want to try and get Lightning's LD and weapon in December. So yes, this, like I said earlier, this is going to be a really great time for you if you're wanting to save up, because if you're waiting for Lightning or Cloud or anything like that, you're going to want some time to build resources back up after we've just had Noctis and Arden. So saving early is going to benefit you in the long run. Reigns Dolly says, I know that Kefka works great for some players, but he's never meshed with my playstyle. I know I prefer characters that add debuffs like Noctis and Freya. They just compete with each other. I have Arciella and I love playing with her, so since that works for me, I'm sticking with it. So yes, as I said, with Noctis in particular, that point blank Warp Strike can't go off while you have Kefka in your party because there's no room for the debuff. So it's actually very difficult to use Kefka with that, and I think that that playstyle, having to change your team composition, is actually going to be off-putting for a lot of people. Pale Raider here says both banners will be skipped. Although Kefka himself brings much mischief to the table, his banner mates leave much to be desired based on upcoming standards. This is made easier by the fact that Shadow and Aerith are already on my roster. All in all, for me, this was always going to be the designated recovery period post Noctis and Arden. Sorry, Kefka. So yeah, as I said, it's like definitely a good time to start recovering your resources from Noctis and Arden and all the banners that followed them. In the other camp, however, Cobalt Zox says, I'd probably allocate a few tickets for Kefka and Freya. Kefka would be nice and Freya is a quasi-favourite, but the only weapons I actually need are the LDBT and Freya's kit, so there's a lot of dead draws. So I'll have a punt, but Kefka can be awkward to build a team around, so he isn't a huge priority right now. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Kefka, and that leads me to want to get his stuff, but I think that if you have no attachment to Kefka, he is relatively easy to go past, even though he's a burst character and people do get excited for him. Rossum says, I don't have any of these EXs. My main goal for each would be for Shadow and Freya, but obviously Kefka and LD and Burst would be a pleasant surprise. Since I don't have any EXs, I feel there's a lot to gain from throwing some gems at it. This comment in particular I wanted to highlight in favour of newer players. Like, if newer players have nothing on some of these banners, then, I mean, I don't know, I can't say speak for everyone as to how long they've been playing, but if you find that you're walking into a banner that you have literally nothing on, not a single EX, not LD, not anything, then sometimes that it's like you're going to lean more to pulling on that banner purely because you just want to get something new. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, just as long as you gauge up your resources against what you actually want later down the line and you go, I can afford to pull here a little bit, that's not a problem. Ferntendo here says, I'm going to be spending gems on Kefka. Because of him being able to turn his debuffs into frames, not allowing the enemies to buff themselves up, this obviously makes them weak in the process. Plus, Emperor's LD is along the way, and if I can get Kefka's burst when pulling for that, I'll be glad. Now, while I support the fact that you want to pull gems on anything, just be careful spending gems on the LD if you're planning on pulling for Emperor's LD afterwards. Purely because I've had so many messages, and I've said this when Burst came out, I said this many, many times, do be careful pulling for a Burst when the first banner comes up. Because the amount of times where you're going to get a find, you have to pity a burst or something like that, and then a free pull comes along on, say, Emperor's LD, and then you get the burst again, it's gonna feel really rough. So definitely, like, spend your resources on Kefka if you're a big fan of him or anything like that, of course, or if you find reasons as to why you want to do so. Just be careful when you spend your resources in the process. So that's going to be all for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you gained some knowledge about Kefka. Although, to be honest, like, he's actually one of the simplest characters that I've been able to do a should you pull for, because it wasn't that long ago he got his EX Plus in his rework, so he didn't get one or anything, and he gets an LD in his burst, which are actually fairly simplistic in nature as well, so it was quite an easy read. But let me know in the comments below if you plan on pulling for Kefka, if you guys want to join in with the would you pull section of the videos, and definitely check out the Patreon link in the description box below, as well as all the other benefits, including having your personal title cards made and getting shout-outs from every video. So thank you to all of you that support that and support the Would You Pull as much as you have. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and of course, ring that bell for notifications on any future videos I might be making, and I will see you guys in the next stream or video. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care.